All right. Hey, everybody. Looks like we've got everybody is getting led into the meeting. So we'll wait here for just a minute as they pop on, and then we'll get started here in just a few. All right, just to keep us on track on time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for the June monthly Master Beef webinar series. Tonight, we have Dr. Jason Smith. He's located at Texas A&M at the Amarillo station, and he's an extension beef cattle specialist there, but he may seem familiar because he was here at UT not too long ago. And tonight, he's going to be talking to us about implanting calves. And so just go ahead and stay tuned. And just as a note, while we're going through these slides, there are some poll questions that will allow you to be interactive. And we're going to start with those here pretty quick. So make sure that you're ready to answer some questions when they pop up. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Jason.
All right. Thank you very much, Katie. Slides pulled up. Can you see that?
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. Well, it's certainly a privilege to have the opportunity to be a part of tonight's webinar and be back, at least virtually, in Tennessee. And I'm going to be talking about a topic that I have a lot of interest in and think has a lot of potential moving forward in our beef industry, and something that I believe is one of our far underutilized but incredibly valuable technology. So I'm going to talk about implant programs, and specifically going to talk about implant programs for cow-calf operations. Before we get too far into this, I do want to learn a little bit about everyone that's on the webinar. So I might go ahead and give Mallory the opportunity to open our polling questions. We're going to do a series of about 4 questions here right at the beginning. We'll get a little ways into the webinar, ask you a few more questions, and then we'll ask you a few at the end. So Mallory, do you want to go ahead and cue that first set of questions up?
Yes, I'll publish that. I've got one more choice to add, and then I'll get that published for you.
Okay, perfect. So I may, as Mallory's finishing that up, just a little bit of overview. I mentioned, this general theme or topic that we're going to work through tonight is growth promoting hormone implants, and specifically their application on cow-calf operations. Okay, so talk a little bit about what they are. We'll talk through some things about the hormone content of beef and some other foods. Talk about the effect of implants on calf growth performance, translate that into value, so what that might mean from a return on investment standpoint, and then we'll finish with some of the strategies that we can employ on the operation to maximize return on the implant investment. Now, one of the things I will say is I mentioned that I'm focusing this towards cow-calf operations. If you're solely a stocker operation or a backgrounder, the vast majority of what we're going to talk about tonight still applies to you and your operation. And so I encourage you to pay just as close as attention if you are not a cow-calf operator as you should if you are. All right. Okay. So it looks like the first set of questions are up there. So I'll just read through them really quickly. So the first one, ask which of the following best describes your operation. So are you cow-calf only? Are you stocker cattle only? Are you a combination of cow-calf and stocker cattle, or do you have no cow? Okay. Second question, want to know if you finish any of your own cattle. So whether you're finishing cattle on a commercial scale and potentially selling to a packer, or if you're selling freezer beef, whether that's on the hoof or retail beef. Third question, and that's yes or no answer. Third question, do you currently utilize growth promoting hormone implants? Okay, 3 options. So either yes, no, or I don't know what growth promoting hormone implants are. So in the situation where maybe you are, maybe you aren't, you don't know. And then the fourth and last question in this series is if you currently don't utilize implants, what's the primary reason? Okay, and so there's a number of options there. The first, you don't know enough about them. Okay, second, the value isn't worth the expense. Third, it's something you don't have time for. Fourth, your facilities won't allow it. Next, you market cattle in a way that restricts their use. Or you're concerned about the hormone content of beef from implanted cattle, or some other reason that hasn't been or option that hasn't been offered to you. And then last, it's not applicable because you implant all or some of your calves. Okay, so really this would be the first options that I mentioned would be to those of you that are not implanting calves, and that last would apply to you if you are. And each of these are single choice options. So if there is a question where more than one option applies to you, just go ahead and select the one that is most applicable to you and your operation. Katie and Mallory, I cannot see the responses coming in on my end, so y'all may have to kind of talk us through where we're at in terms of getting those responses. So I don't want to take too much time, but I also want to make sure I give everybody enough time to answer.
That's okay. I can see it on my end. We've got about 7 more people to answer.
Okay, perfect. All right, we'll just wait a few more minutes for everybody to get through those, and then we'll hopefully look at them and then move forward with tonight's program.
We got about 5 more people and then we're set.
Okay. Maybe we'll just wait one more minute and then we'll go ahead and close it if that's all right with y'all.
Okay, we've got 2 more.
Okay.
Okay. I've got 26, and I think that's about where we're gonna get.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm gonna end it now.
Perfect. And will those results go ahead and pop up for us? There we go. I'm just taking, I guess I need to be a little more patient. All right.
Okay.
And just make sure everybody else seeing the same thing I am. You're seeing the results on your screen, right, Katie and Mallory? So about the vast majority of producers are cow-calf only, but pretty good. About 7 out of the 25 are either stocker cattle only or some combination of cow-calf and stocker cattle. Excellent. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of what we talk about tonight is going to be applicable at the cow-calf level, but also for stocker or backgrounding cattle. So about half of you are finishing your own cattle. That's excellent. The next question, do you currently utilize growth promoting hormone implants? So the vast majority of you either do not use them or don't know if you're using them. So almost 90% of you are currently not using implants. Only about 12% of you are. Okay. So reasons why they aren't being utilized. So winner in that category is you don't know enough about them. Excellent. I hope that I'm able to change that tonight. One of you, value isn't worth the expense. Another, something that you don't have time for. Another, my facilities won't allow it. One, market cattle that restrict their use. Okay. 4, so about 16% of you are concerned about the hormone content of beef from implanted cattle. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that this evening. And then other reason. Okay, so about 16% of you said other reasons. So if you wouldn't mind, and Mallory and Katie, just let me know if this is not currently an option. And we're not going to spend a lot of time right now to go through these, but I would like to come back to this at the end when we get time for question and answers. So those of you that mentioned an other reason, if you're willing and want to type into the chat that reason, and you can send it privately to me or to Katie or Mallory. I think that's an option. So if you can, just send that privately to them if you don't want everybody to see it. Otherwise, you can send it to me. I'm just interested in finding out those reasons and want to make sure that we have the opportunity to address any concerns or any thoughts along those lines tonight. All right. So moving on, and I certainly appreciate y'all's willingness and participation to do that. And I encourage you to answer the remaining 4 questions that we'll have tonight. That's going to be incredibly useful information for us, and you've already provided some of that. So greatly appreciated. Okay, so what are implants? Okay, so I'm going to use the slang terminology. I just call them implants. Okay, the majority of the industry that use them is just going to call them implants. But what they are is they're growth promoting hormone implants. Okay, and that entails or consists of a dose of 1 or more small pellets that are administered beneath the skin of the ear. Okay, and if you haven't seen an implant before, think something about each of those pellets will be roughly the size of a Tic Tac. Okay, that probably does a pretty decent job of probably pretty similar size. Okay, now that dose may be 1 pellet, and it may be as many as 8 or 9 or more pellets, depending upon the implant, depending upon the specific product. Okay, so 1 implant dose is not always just 1 pellet. Okay, a lot of them are going to be 3 or more pellets. Okay, but their purpose and really what they do is that they deliver a small amount of 1 or 2 either natural or synthetic sex steroid hormones to the animal over an extended period of time. So depending upon the product, they may be 1 or 2 of the hormones or the hormone analogs that are listed next. So progesterone, estradiol benzoate, or Zeranol. So those would be the estrogenic options. And then the androgenic options, so the testosterone type options, would be either trenbolone acetate or testosterone propionate. Okay. At the cow-calf level, there are products available that are only one of those or a combination of two of those. Okay. There are no product options that are available that are a combination of more than two. Okay. From a practical standpoint, and the reason why we're talking about them tonight is their growth promoting technologies that improve rate of body weight gain and feed efficiency. Okay. The way they do that is that small amount of one or two hormones or hormone analogs that are slowly administered to the animal over an extended period of time increase circulating levels of other hormones like growth hormone or insulin-like growth factor 1 in the animal, or they have a direct action on that animal's muscle cells. So they typically work through one or the other action for a specific type of hormone, but our combination, so the combination, particularly the combination androgenic and estrogenic implants, so those that have a testosterone ingredient and those that have an estrogen ingredient, they're going to act through both of those modes of action. So they're going to stimulate some hormone secretion in the animal. They're also going to directly have some effect on the animal's muscle cells. In doing that, they stimulate protein accretion. Okay, they minimize protein turnover, or they at least increase protein accretion without decreasing protein without increasing protein catabolism. Okay, the protein in our muscle is constantly being broken down and rebuilt. Okay, so these changes result in a net increase in building of protein in muscle. Okay, what that translates to in the animal is increased lean tissue or muscle growth. Okay. Now, a couple of things that are important to recognize about implants in the US is that they are regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. Okay. And so in order for them to be utilized and marketed in the US, they have to have been approved. Okay. I had the opportunity to spend about 2 years working for the Food and Drug Administration on the medicated feed sides. But one of the things that I got to spend some time in and really learn in and out was some of the aspects of the approval process. And what I will tell you is that is an unbelievably rigorous process. One example I'll use, and this is a recent example from one specific product that a provider was having an issue sourcing one of the hormone ingredients they use in their implants, and they were going to use another source of that ingredient. FDA wouldn't allow it. Okay, so it had to be exactly what was approved for that specific drug or product's approval. Okay, that product is only going to be approved if it has been demonstrated to be safe to both humans that consume products from animals that have been administered that implant, and that it's also effective at doing what it says it's supposed to do. Okay. One of the things that also comes along with those regulations are that the product has to be used in accordance with the label. Okay. That label depends upon factors or aspects of that product's approval. Okay, so while for certain drugs, a veterinarian may be able to prescribe extra label use, so using the drug in a way that's different from the label, that does not apply to growth promoting hormone implants. Okay, so a veterinarian or myself or anyone else cannot tell you to use an implant product in any way other than how it is approved to be used and what is listed on the label. Okay, veterinarian can't do it. I can't do it. No one else legally can do it either. Okay, so they have to be used according to what has been described and listed on the label. One of the things that I think is very important for us to recognize about these products, though, is that they have no slaughter withdrawal requirements because they do not result in drug residues when they're used in accordance with the label. Okay, so when we use these products appropriately, we don't have to be concerned about a violative drug residue. Okay. The other thing that's important to recognize is that even though this product is approved on the front end before it's made available to us, the process doesn't end there. Okay. And so the products are continuously monitored after approval. Okay. And this is done primarily through the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service. Okay. And so we could spend all evening talking about the screening that goes on at harvest for cattle. Okay. One of the things that would potentially show up as a violative residue, if it existed as a at a high level, would be some of these hormone ingredients that go into the implant pellet. Okay, so USDA's FSIS, so the slaughter plant inspectors, they're monitoring that. Okay, and so they're monitoring to see if there's an issue with the occurrence of violative residues for any of these products. Okay, and all that information, the results of that is available online. And what I can tell you from those numbers that I've looked through is we do not have an issue with violative residues from implants. We use them correctly, and when they're used correctly, there's no risk of them resulting in an issue. Now, I think another important concept that we have to recognize is there is no such thing as hormone-free beef. Okay, there's no such thing as hormone-free food. Okay, hormones are necessary for life to occur. Okay, they're either hormones or compounds that have some kind of hormone activity are produced by all plants and animals. Without them, life as we know it ceases to exist. Okay, life is not possible without them. They're important signaling molecules. They tell the body what to do. Okay, they play absolutely critical roles in sustaining our lives, the lives of animals, and the lives of plants. Okay, so there's no such thing as hormone-free meat, milk, or egg products. Okay, as I mentioned, all foods of animal origin contain hormones, and then all foods of plant origin contain compounds that have hormone activity. Okay, so they may not directly have the same chemical composition as that hormone, but they're capable of binding to its receptors. They're capable of eliciting a similar response to that actual hormone. Okay, and I think that's really important for us to recognize, particularly if we are not using any growth promoting hormone implants, but we're marketing beef in a way that tries to capture some value, because that particular, for those of us that are finishing cattle, so selling freezer beef, and want to say, well, this beef's hormone free. That's absolutely false. Okay, regardless of what we did to the animal, it's absolutely false. Okay, and it's important that we're not creating misperceptions through our marketing strategies. Okay, so the next series of slides is going to deal with the estrogen content and then eventually the estrogenic activity, two potentially different things, of common foods. I'm going to include beef in that, and then we're going to talk about some differences that potentially exist between beef from implanted cattle versus beef from non-implanted cattle. Okay, and so this is a chart that I would imagine some of you have seen in some way, shape, or form in the past, that just lists the estrogen content of some common foods. They're obviously not all listed there, but really this does a decent job of showing the variation, the magnitude in estrogen content of various food products. Okay. in this list, and this doesn't necessarily mean that they're the lowest of all foods, but if we look at nanograms of estradiol and estrone or their equivalents in estrogen-like compounds, we go from roughly 1 nanogram per 3 ounces up to a little over 128 million nanograms per 3 ounce serving for soy flour, 19 million for tofu. Okay. I don't bring this up and point this out to be at the disadvantage of any of these others. Okay. That's not the point of this table. The point of this table, though, is to show you relatively where beef ranks within those, and to show that the relative hormone content provided by a 3 ounce serving of beef, when compared to a number of other different animal and plant origin foods, is very, very small. All right. So this is a direct comparison of different estrogen forms, and then them combined over here in the cluster of bars to the right, from beef, from cattle that were either implanted or not implanted. Okay, and these were steers that were used to create these beef products. Okay, and so depending upon how we look at estrogen content, and so these would be the major estrogen compounds. Depending upon how we look at that, we could say, well, numerically, implanted versus non-implanted are different. If we look at 17 beta estradiol, implanted cattle have slightly numerically greater levels of estrogen. Okay, these are parts per trillion. So 1 part per trillion is the equivalent of 1 picogram per gram, or 2.2 nanograms per pound. Okay, if we look at 17 alpha estradiol, though, beef from implanted cattle had, from a numerical standpoint, substantially less. Same for estrone. From a combined standpoint, in this experiment, implanted cattle actually had less combined estrogen or compounds. Okay. The important thing to point out about these, though, is I'm talking about numerical differences. From a statistical standpoint, none of these clusters of bars are different from one another, meaning that the beef from implanted versus non-implanted cattle, at least in this experiment, had the same amounts of different types of estrogen molecules, or different forms of estrogen molecules, to say that more correctly. Okay, not every experiment shows the same thing. For each experiment that shows they're no different, there's probably one experiment that says statistically they are different, but of a similar numerical magnitude to what is shown here. Where we have to be careful with interpreting those differences is that most of those experiments did not look at all estrogen forms. Okay, a lot of those are only looking at the 17 beta estradiol. Okay, which these others are going to play a role in the overall estrogen contribution from what is being consumed. Okay. Now I want to fast forward. So that last experiment I showed you was from the late 90s. I want to fast forward to an experiment that was done just a few years ago. And this was actually done by some folks at North Dakota State University. And it's a really, really interesting experiment. And what they did was they took a couple different food products. So they have tofu, they have beef from non-implanted steers that qualified as organic. Okay. They had ground beef from implanted steers that were raised using conventional practices. They had skim milk, and they had rice. Okay. What they then did is they took those components, they measured estrogen content of them, and did various things. But the most unique thing about this experiment was they actually took these components, and the amount took proportionally the amount that would expect to be exposed to cells. and they actually cultured human mammary tissue cells in media that contained these different substrates and looked at their actual estrogenic activity as defined by its ability to cause cellular changes. Okay, the numbers you see on the graph, or the bars or bar that you can see, is the quantification or the numerics, the numbers behind that actual activity that they observed at the cellular level. Okay, the point here, there's really 2 points I want to make here. One, if we looked at tofu relative to the others, it had an incredibly large amount of estrogenic activity. Okay, if we look at our beef products, milk products, and rice, you can't even see the bar on the graph, is how low they were in terms of their estrogenic activity. The other thing that I want to point out about this is from a numerical standpoint, if we look at ground beef collectively, regardless of which source it was from, whether it was from organic non-implanted cattle or conventional implanted cattle, roughly the same amount of estrogenic activity as rice, something most consumers, most of us, are not going to think about as potentially having any estrogenic activity at all. Okay. The other thing I want to point out is from a numerical standpoint, a greater prevalence of estrogenic activity from the organic non-implanted ground beef. Okay. This is not to say one's more or less than the other, but to say if we're marketing organic type, natural type cattle that aren't implanted, under the premise that that beef contains a lower level of hormones, there is a large chance that that presumption is incorrect. Okay. The bigger picture, and probably the more important point here for us to recognize, is that as a whole, potential estrogenic activity contributed from beef relative to the potential from some others is a drop in the bucket. Okay. It is incredibly small. Okay. The next one that I want to show you, and this is the last that we'll spend some time on about hormone content of beef, is I want to show hormone content of beef, or that could potentially be contributed from beef relative to normal daily human production. Okay. And so in this, I'm just using 17 beta estradiol. Okay. So we could essentially multiply these numbers by 3. So, and when I say these numbers, I mean the numbers of the 4 groups that are farthest to the right. So the 4 ounces of beef from either non-planted and implanted cattle, or the 12 ounces of beef from either non-planted or implanted cattle. We can multiply them by 3 to get to total estrogen compounds. But this cluster of bars on the left is what would be estimated as normal daily production of the 17 beta estradiol form of estrogen in men, women, boys, and girls. Okay. So men and women post-pubertally, boys and girls prior to puberty. Okay. What I've done is I've calculated the amount that would potentially be consumed and would potentially have the opportunity to be absorbed, although we know that far less than this would actually be absorbed because of what's going to happen to that hormone, 1, when it's cooked, and 2, once it actually gets to the liver. Okay, we know it's going to undergo some changes and probably going to decrease that number to about 10% of what was actually consumed. But nonetheless, if we assume 100% of what was consumed actually makes it into circulation, we look at 4 ounces of beef per day, so an actual serving size, or the reality is most of us are not going to consume 4 ounces of beef per day. We're going to consume somewhere more along the lines of 12 ounces of beef per day. If we consume a decent amount of beef, these are absolutely incredibly, from a numerical standpoint, insignificant drops in this overall lake of hormones in the body. Okay. And so I just wanted to put that in front of you as a relative amount that would be consumed from different levels of beef, from implanted or non-implanted cattle, versus the amount that we consume. Okay. These numbers do not include supplemental estrogen that might be consumed from something like a birth control pill or hormone replacement therapy or anything along those lines. Okay, so these would be basal production levels. Okay, I've just calculated those out to what those actually translate to. I mean, most of us, if we're not dealing in research and science or using the metric system, grams don't mean a whole heck of a lot to us, right? Just shy of 454 grams per pound. So I've taken that 1 nanogram per day, because this scale is nanograms per day, and translated that into pounds per day. Okay, taken that and then multiplied it by 3 meals per day by 365 days per year. Okay, and shown what this potential difference would be between implanted and non-implanted cattle, if there were, and such as in this situation, an increased level of 17 beta estradiol type estrogen in implanted cattle relative to those that were not implanted. Okay, so let's back up a second. All right, now's a good time for us to go ahead, Mallory, if you don't mind, and go ahead and open the poll for the next 2 questions. Okay, as we're answering those questions, I'm going to go through and ask you all those questions, but I do want to take the time, and Mallory and Katie, tell me if this is not allowed, but I would like to go ahead and take the time to field any questions on the hormone content of beef or anything that I've covered up to this point in time before we get too far down the road. And the reason I'd like to do that, if that's okay with y'all, is that I think it's important that if we do have concerns now, that we address those concerns, or we talk about them, if nothing else, before we go on and talk about some of the other information, before we get into more production oriented type things. Would that be okay, Mallory or Katie?
Yeah, that sounds good. And folks, you can use either the Q&A box or the chat, and just send your questions in, and we'd be happy to read those out and make sure that we get those answered.
Excellent. Excellent. Real quick, I'm going to read through the questions that are on your screen for the poll. The first question I want to ask you is how do you think implant status affects the value of feeder cattle? Do you believe that feeder cattle are worth less if they've been implanted? Or do you think they're worth more if they have been implanted relative to their non-implanted contemporaries, if all other things were created equally? Okay. Or do you feel that implant status doesn't affect feeder cattle value, or do you not know? And the second question be, do you currently sell cattle under a documented and verified natural or non-hormone treated cattle, so NHTC designation that restricts the use of implants? So first option would be yes, you sell cattle under a documented and verified natural or NHTC designation that restricts implants. No, you don't sell them under that designation, but you communicate to the seller and or the buyer that your calves have not been implanted. No, you don't, or excuse me, no, you do implant your calves, or no, it's not applicable to you because you do not raise or sell calves. So as you all are answering those polls, if you do, or those 2 poll questions, if you do have any questions, that you want to ask about any of the content up to this point in time, now would be a good time for us to go ahead and address those. And I'm going to go through and look at the chat as of right now, just to see some of the other concerns that maybe were mentioned as to why people wouldn't use them. So one of those would be other, so seed stock cattle where use affects their records. Okay, makes sense. And we'll talk a little bit about using them on potential breeding animals. Not going to spend a ton of time on that, but we'll talk about that. And just got a mention from Greg. Hey, Greg, good to have you on tonight. That there are a number in Cumberland County, so they're going through and if I interpret that correctly, combining those polls. Certainly appreciate you going through and doing that, Greg, and appreciate everybody there participating in that. So any questions that haven't been sent in or comments that haven't been sent in just yet? All right, Mallory, you just let me know once we get to the point of I think we had, what did we get to, 25 last time?
We got to 25 last time. We're at 21 now, so
Excellent.
84%.
Excellent.
We got 3 more people to answer in, and then we'll be set.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna leave it for about 30 more seconds, and I'm gonna end it.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right. So, okay, one person believes that implanted feeder cattle are worth less than non-implanted. Okay, 10, so about half people believe that implanted cattle are worth more. That's excellent. We're going to spend probably more time than we need to talking about that. So I won't spend too terribly much time on that. So 2 believe implant status affects feeder cattle value, and then a little less than half aren't sure. Okay, so we will spend some time going through that. So do you sell cattle under documented and verified natural or NHTC designations that restrict implants? Okay, so 0 out of 22, so 0% sell cattle that way. Almost everyone, interestingly enough, almost everyone communicates to the seller or the buyer that the cattle have not been implanted. Okay, 5% mention the implant, and then 5% that don't raise calves. So we'll talk about some of those or some of the things that maybe play into those misperceptions or maybe reasons why some of these I'll use that communication that they haven't been implanted probably aren't necessary. All right, so this is a data set that what's commonly referred to as the superior data set. And so it's a data set that represents just shy of about 30,000 lots of cattle. So just shy of about 3 million head that were marketed through Superior Livestock Auction over 4 years. Okay, consisted of about 92 different video auctions. Okay, the cattle that were marketed through those sales ranged from anywhere from 220, or the lots of cattle, the lot averages ranged anywhere from 220 pounds to a little over 900 pounds. So do a pretty good job of representing the variation and potential weights of feeder cattle that we market. Okay, and what this specific analysis or comparison is the average price in dollars per hundredweight that was paid for those lots of cattle, separated based on whether the cattle were listed as having been implanted or not implanted. Okay, statistically and numerically speaking, there was no difference in price per hundredweight or price per pound, if we divide it by 100, paid for cattle based on their implant designation. Now, that does not necessarily include whether or not they were listed as documented and verified natural or NHTC type cattle. Okay, this is just whether or not they were designated as implanted or not implanted. Point of that, there was no value in saying that the cattle were not implanted. Okay, and they were worth the same amount as cattle that were implanted on a dollars per unit of weight basis. Okay, that's an important thing to remember, is that dollars per pound is no different. Okay, the reason why we implant cattle, and particularly implant calves during the suckling phase, so while they're still nursing the calf, is because we expect to get an improvement in pre-weaning average daily gain somewhere in the vicinity of 0.05 to upwards of 1/4 of a pound per head per day. That translates into an increase in weaning weight of approximately 3 to 7%. Okay, that's solely in response to that single growth promoting hormone implant administered during the suckling phase. Okay, that equates to about, depending upon where we're at in terms of our herd's productivity and calf weaning weight, that's going to equate to somewhere in the vicinity of 10 to upwards of 50 pounds of additional weaning weight. Okay, what I've done is I've taken some data that's been adapted from 2 publications, and this is data from 58 different experiments that quantified the relative increase in percentage of weaning weight in response to the different classes or types of implants. Okay, so that first bar, that would be our combination progesterone and estradiol implants. So of those that are currently on the market and approved to be used in suckling calves would include Synovex C or Component EC with Thailand. Okay, the second or the middle bar is Ralgro, so a Zeranol or just a solely estrogen based implant. The third bar would also be solely estrogen based implants, but more of the longer duration estrogen based implants that would be Compudose or Encore. Okay, I'm going to talk about these in a little more detail. But wanted to point them out. And really, if we look at these three, what I'll call short to medium duration implants, and the implants that the majority of us are going to use if we are implanting suckling calves, view these as no different in terms of the expected response. I think the vast majority of the data, and this graph does a good job of showing it, we look at these, you expect somewhere in the vicinity of about a 5% improvement in weaning weight in response to the implant. Okay, here the average was just shy of 6% for those. Okay, huge potential change for a little bit of investment, and we'll talk about that from an economic standpoint here in a minute. Okay, but one of the things I do want to take a minute to address, so we already mentioned that those cattle that were marketed through Superior as either implanted or not implanted, there's no difference in price. Okay. A lot of the perception that exists that calves that were previously implanted will not respond the same way or to the magnitude that calves that were not previously implanted once they get to the feed yard or even to the stocker phase and are implanted there. Okay, so that is a misperception. The misperception is that they will not respond to the same degree to another implant administered during a different phase of growth, and that's incorrect. Okay, so the data, and this is one example from one experiment that shows that. There are a number of others that show the same thing. But if we look at calves that were implanted at branding, okay, so I'm coming to you tonight from the Texas Panhandle, and calves get worked when calves get worked in the spring, it's branding time. Okay, so that would be the same as the initial calfhood vaccinations that would occur at a lot of places east of the Mississippi, such as where a lot of y'all are. That aren't branding calves. Okay, so implanted branding. So most of the time that branding is going to occur at the very beginning of the breeding season. So assume calves are roughly somewhere in the vicinity of 60 to 90 days of age when that's happening. Okay, so this comparison is calves that either were implanted or were not implanted at branding, and how they performed later on throughout the next two phases of production. So that stocker or backgrounding phase, and then eventually at the finishing or feed yard phase. Okay, so no difference in growing phase average daily gain, feed intake, or feed efficiency. No difference in finishing phase average daily gain, feed intake, or feed efficiency. No difference in ribeye area, no difference in marbling, no difference in yield grade. Okay, so a couple things about this. One, those cattle don't perform any differently later on in life. But two, that implant that was administered at branding during the suckling phase did not negatively impact carcass quality of that animal. Okay, now we don't have time to go through it today, but there are some certain times when we implant an animal, we're going to have a negative impact on marbling or carcass marbling and quality grade if that that animal is not fed for a short extended period of time. Okay, we will increase carcass muscularity. So typically there's phases when we implant, we will increase ribeye area, we will increase dressing percent, we will increase yield grade. Okay, point being that there was no negative impact of this implant that was administered during the suckling phase on performance and productivity. So the perception has been that, well, feed yards will pay more for cattle that have not been implanted, and that is false unless those cattle are documented and verified to be enrolled in a NHTC or natural type program. If we tell someone that these are natural or NHTC cattle or they would qualify, doesn't matter. They change hands, that hasn't been documented and verified, they can't ever get that back about those animals. Okay, so there's no value in saying that these cattle have or have not been implanted, because that perception that feed yards think they're worth more is incorrect. Okay. The other thing I want to point out is that implants and other growth promotants, this is true at the cow-calf level, all the way up through the finishing and the feed yard levels, are that implants work through separate modes of action than our other growth promoting technologies. Okay. All right. So what that means is that use of implants while we're also using other growth promoting technologies doesn't negatively influence the response to one or the other. Okay. So the response that the animal experiences because of the implant is completely independent and separate. And because of that, it is additive to the response that they will experience because of an ionophore, like Rumensin or Monovet or Bovatec. Okay. It is independent of the response they will receive at the end of the feeding period if they get a beta agonist like Optiflex or Actogain. Okay. Conventional cattle, so cattle that are not going to be enrolled in a natural or NHTC type program, which is the vast majority, over 90% of feeder cattle. Okay. Those cattle are going to be implanted. They're going to be fed an ionophore and they're going to be fed a beta agonist. Okay. So if we're not selling those documented and verified calves, those calves are going to be implanted later on in the production phase. All right. I mentioned I'd say something about implanting replacements, and I think it is an important consideration. The vast majority of data suggests that if we implant replacement heifers earlier than 30 to 45 days, so a month to a month and a half of age, so if we implant them between birth and 1 or 1.5 months of age, or if we implant them after weaning, so approximately 5 to 7 months of age, that will potentially have a small but negative impact on normal reproductive development. Okay, because of that and that change in development, we're going to expect that to have a small negative impact on fertility. The majority of the data would suggest that if we're administering an implant that is approved to be administered to heifers, and it's being administered between those times, so after, we'll say, a month and a half of age and prior to weaning, the negative impact on fertility is likely to be negligible. But there's no economic benefit to implanting a replacement heifer calf. Okay. I think that is an important to consider, is that while if we could potentially implant a replacement heifer during a limited, but a certain period of development, and it not have a negative impact on her sexual and reproductive development, there's no economic benefit to doing it, because if we implant her as a heifer calf, that response that she experiences, that increased growth, sticks with her, at least to some degree, for the rest of her life. So now all we've done is, yeah, we may have increased her weaning weight by 25 or 30 pounds. We also just made her a 25 or 30 pound heavier mature cow. So we potentially only just made her more expensive to maintain as a cow. Okay. And so while we could potentially do it without having any negative effects on fertility of the animal, from an economic standpoint, probably no benefit in doing that. So if we know that heifers are going to be retained as replacement females, don't implant them. If we know they're not going to be retained as replacement females and they're going to be marketed as feeder cattle, let's implant them. Okay. The gray area is for those that we don't know yet if we're going to keep them or retain them. And those are probably decisions we probably need to talk to your county agent, talk to your specialist, give me a shout, and we can make a risk-based recommendation as to what's going to be the best option and have the potentially greatest return on investment of that decision. There are no implant products that are approved for use in breeding bulls, even if they're bull calves intended for breeding. Okay. There are no products that are approved to be used in what I'm going to refer to market, but we commonly refer to as cull cows or bulls. There are no products approved to be used in dairy females intended for milk production. There are no products approved to be used for veal calves. Okay. So none of the implant products are approved and therefore labeled to be used in any of those classes of cattle. Okay. I've got a series of slides here for that show return on investment at various weaning weight expectations. And so I've broken them down in 100-pound increments from an operation that is going to wean on average 400-pound calves up to an operation that's going to wean on average 700-pound calves. Okay. I'm not going to go spend a lot of time going through all these. I'm going to flip through to 500 pounds because I think that captures the vast majority of commercial producers. They're going to be there in the recording. I will pause for a little bit of time on each of them so they're there. I'm also willing to provide these slides to anybody that wants them. But I don't want to spend more time than we need on this concept. But what I've done, and I'm going to go ahead and click forward to this 500-pound weaned average weaned calf. Okay. And this economic analysis was conducted under the assumptions that we achieve a 4% increase in weaning weight in response to the implant. So on average, we're probably going to be 5%. So I'm being a little conservative in my return on investment. Okay. I'm going to assume a price slide of 6%. Okay. So for every unit increase in weight, we expect price to decline by approximately 6%. I'm going to assume an implant product cost of $1.75 per implant. If we're buying a large quantity of these, we're often going to be able to purchase a calf hood implant far cheaper than that. And what I've used to calculate this, what I'm referring to as complete ROI, is from a cost or an expense standpoint. I've multiplied the implant cost by 2 to account for the labor, supplies, and other things that will be required to actually administer the implant to the animal. Okay, we're probably going to be able to do it for a little cheaper than 2 times of the actual implant cost. Nonetheless, I want to be conservative. Those are the numbers that I've used. I've also broken this down in different calf price scenarios so that this is applicable across most market conditions. Okay. And so where often a 5-weight calf is going to fall is in this, at least in our current or recent market environment, somewhere in the $170 to $180 range. Okay. I'm going to assume if I get a 4% increase in weaning weight, that translates to about 20 additional pounds of weaned calf. That equates to somewhere in the vicinity of $32 to $34 in additional calf value. Okay. Just the implant cost return on investment is somewhere between 18 and a little over 19 to 1. Okay. The complete ROI is somewhere between 9 to 1 and 10 to 1 for this 5-weight calf. Okay. If we look at the response as weaning weight increases, we're going to get a larger response. out of the implant, we're going to get more pounds of weaned calf. Okay. As that happens, return on investment goes up. Okay. So even at the 400-pound level, while that ROI was less than the 500-pound, the 600-pound, and what I'll show is the 700-pound weaned calf, it is still a substantial and positive return on the investment. Okay. And these numbers just show that for that 700-pound weaned calf. And notice as I click through these slides, I've shifted where I expect those calves to fall in terms of price point, and included those in bold just so that they pop out and they're a little easier to see. So on the 700-pound calf, we're looking at a complete ROI of somewhere in the vicinity of 11 to 12 to 1. And so what I'd ask you is, what bank or investment account do you have access to that will currently yield an 8 to 12% interest or return on investment rate, okay, on a small investment over 100 days? If you know of one, tell me, because I'm interested in it. I don't know of any that exist right now that are anywhere close to this. This is implanting calves. Okay. Implanting calves, from a return on investment standpoint, are the equivalent to taking those dollars that we would invest in purchasing the implant and administering it to the implant, and them accruing interest at a rate of 8 to 12%. Okay. I think that's hugely, hugely impactful. And while that 20 to 30 pounds in weight doesn't sound a lot, it potentially is substantially economically relevant. Okay. One of the other things I want to address is the added value of implanting calves versus the NHTC or natural type premium that would be attributed only to the aspect of those cattle qualifying as natural or NHTC. Okay, so this is a similar type, albeit to a slightly lesser magnitude of cattle that were marketed through Superior Livestock Auction from 2010 to 2018. Okay. One of the things that data set showed was that if we separate the different aspects of value added bells and whistles type marketing attributes, we look at just the natural and NHTC premium, it's a very small component of premiums that are attributed to other cattle that are marketed under certain program designations. I typically call them program cattle. Okay. Just the natural or NHTC portion of that was $1.72 per hundredweight over that 8-year period of time. Okay. That's $1.72 per hundred. Okay. So just shy of 2 cents per pound. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean that program cattle aren't worth more than that, but it's the other aspects of those cattle, source and age verification, just as an example, that appear to be contributing to a much greater portion of that premium. Okay. And so what I've done is I've taken some of those scenarios we just walked through and applied those numbers to them, but corrected them for these $150 per hundredweight to $210 per hundredweight price points per feeder cattle. Okay. I've assumed that in this scenario, the implant adds 28 pounds of additional weight. Okay. And then I've calculated what the added value for a 700-pound calf would be. And I've done a 700-pound calf because the reality is that from a feed yard purchasing standpoint, we're often not interested in buying 4 and 5 weight natural or NHTC cattle, because the fallout rate for those cattle from program acceptance is so high. We're typically going to be more interested in trying to acquire yearling type calves that are likely going to be better from a health standpoint. They're going to be lower risk of falling out of that natural or NHTC program. Okay. And so I've calculated what that added value is for that weight on that 700-pound calf. adjusted that NHTC premium to 2021, 2022 type numbers. Okay, those numbers that are listed over here. Okay, so taking that $1.72 per hundredweight premium and adjusted that to a little over a $2 to upwards of almost a $3 per hundredweight premium, calculated that added value in dollars per head, and then the difference in the far right hand corner, which is expressed as the implant advantage in dollars per head. Okay, so at a $1.50, that difference is almost $25 per head for 7 weight calves. Okay, at a $1.80, that difference is roughly $30 per head. That's not total added value of implanting versus not implanting. That's the difference between the benefit of implanting versus the small benefit of selling those cattle under a natural or NHTC type designation. Now, where I want people to be careful with these numbers are that this does not represent all programs. There are absolutely some natural and NHTC type programs out there that will potentially offer more than a $2 or $3 per hundredweight premium for natural or NHTC. Those programs, however, are very few and far between. Okay, and so for that reason, I'm confident that this table, this data set, paints a pretty representative picture of the potential dollars that might be left on the table by not implanting cattle, even if you are marketing them through a natural and an NHTC type program. Okay, we've got 5 options, implant options, that are available and approved for use in suckling calves in the US. Okay, so these are approved to be used prior to weaning. I've listed some of the specifications for these different products. So the 3 on this slide are going to be what I'm going to call our short to medium duration implants: Ralgro, Cinevex C, and Component EC with Thailand. Again, some of the relevant information from those labels. This is not complete label information, so I encourage you to consult with the label and make sure that you're using the product in accordance with them. Okay, we also have a multi-institutional, actually 2 multi-institutional publications that are geared towards implant programs for suckling calves that are currently in press. So they're currently going through our marketing communications program, and hope for those to be available in the coming weeks. And that was an effort between us at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, Dr. Reinhardt at University of Tennessee, Dr. Matt Hersom, who's now at Clemson, and Dr. Lawton Stewart at the University of Georgia. And so I hope to have those available to you in the next few weeks. They will be made available on UT's, at least the expectation is that they'll be available through UT as well as those other institutions. Okay, the other 2 product options that are available, my mouse just quit working on me, are Compudos and Encore. These are going to be what we'd consider to be more of the longer duration implants. Probably see more use of these in calf ranches and confinement type scenarios than we do in suckling calves. Nonetheless, some of that relevant or pertinent information is included on this slide. Not going to go through all of it in detail, but it'll be there on the recording for anybody that wants it. The important thing I want to point out about these is these products particularly are not approved for use in suckling heifer calves. Okay, and so they're only approved, and during the suckling stage of production, they're only approved for use in steer calves. Okay, now what I want to do is try and transfer or translate some of that information into some potential protocols that you could put to use on your operation. What I present is not necessarily to say if you have another option that's been working for you. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, but for those of you that are looking for another option or maybe interested in starting to implant, these are some recipes for success. And I encourage you, if you want to talk more to someone about this, reach out to your county agent, reach out to your specialist or myself, and happy to help in any way that we can. Okay, but for calves that are going to be marketed as feeder cattle at or soon after weaning, so these are calves that are going to get weaned on diesel fuel. We're either not going to wean them, or they're going to be sold soon after weaning, not preconditioned or backgrounded. Those we want to implant them with, if they're steers or heifers, Ralgro, Cinebex C, or Component EC with Thailand, at branding or somewhere in the vicinity of 70 to 100 days prior to marketing is going to be the ideal situation. Is it going to be okay to implant them prior to that? Sure, as long as the label permits that. Okay. Again, make sure the label allows you to do that. There are age restrictions. Okay. Some implants cannot be administered immediately after birth. Okay. And so make sure you're familiar with those and how to use the product. Okay. And steers only, Computos might be an option. Because it's an extended duration implant, we want to administer that one somewhere in the vicinity of 160 to 200 days prior to marketing those calves. That's going to be the sweet spot. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly when we have to do it. Okay. Because I often get that question of, well, I missed that 100-day window, but I'm at 60 days. Is there still value in implanting the cattle? Yes. Is the magnitude of response going to be the same? No, but you're probably still going to get the majority of the response, because the majority of that response is going to occur early on in that implant's payout period. Okay. Now, if we're going to market feeder cattle after weaning in preconditioning, okay, this is going to be a situation where, actually, I'm going to go ahead and just switch over to this slide. It probably does a better job of painting the picture for all post weaning type operations that are either preconditioning or backgrounding cattle for an extended period of time. Okay, we're going to want to administer that initial implant just as that previous example, implanted at branding or 70 to 100 days prior to weaning. Then we want to reimplant those calves at weaning and potentially use a higher potency implant, particularly if we're going to manage those cattle on a relatively high plane of nutrition. Okay, and this table lists the options that are available to us. So these are all options that are approved to be used at these various levels of, or stages or phases of production. Okay, so again, our suckling implant options, so those that we can administer prior to weaning, are Ralgro, Cinebex C, Component EC with Thailand, Computos, and Encore. Those that are approved to be administered at or after weaning, so during a growing or backgrounding phase. So once the cattle have been weaned, they're in a new production phase. Okay. The options that are available there include, and some of these we didn't discuss in detail, but happy to answer any questions about them, are Ralgro, Revelor G, Component TEG with Thailand, Component ES with Thailand, Component EH with Thailand, Cinebex S, Cinebex H, and Cinebex One Grass. Okay, now a little bit about some of those. Revelor G and Component TEG with Thailand, per the label, those are only approved to be administered to cattle that are managed on pasture. Okay, so if we're feeding cattle in a dry lot, that's not a labeled option for us. Okay, Component ES with Thailand, Cinebex S, those are steer only implants. Component EH with Thailand and Cinebex H, those are heifer only implants. Okay, and then one of the things that I'll mention about Cinebex One Grass would be compared to the other options here, this is going to be an option that is probably going to be most appropriately used if we're going to be backgrounding cattle for an extended period of time. So we would consider it close to a 200-day implant or a 200-day implant. So that's going to be an option that's going to be appropriate to use in that situation. The other options are probably going to be more economical options for us if we're going to be backgrounding cattle for, let's say, 100 days or less. Okay. A couple things about maximizing implant efficacy. So, we want this to yield a positive return on investment. There's some things we can do to screw that up. Okay. And so what we don't want is this to be just an expense. Okay. So just like any other pharmaceutical product, want to make sure that we store and handle implants appropriately. The label tells us everything we need to know about how to do that. Okay, so read the label, store it, handle it, transport it, administer it per the label instructions. Okay. Implants are the one situation where we do want to disinfect needles. Okay, we want to disinfect them before we use them, and we want to disinfect them between each animal. Okay, we want to, this is, again, I'll say it again, this is the one situation where we do want to chemically disinfect our needles. What we want to avoid, though, is soaking the needle in disinfectant, particularly if the gun is, or applicator is, loaded with an implant dose. Soaking that needle is going to cause the implant potentially to start to dissolve, clog the gun up. One, the implant won't work. Two, we're going to have functionality issues out of the applicator. Okay. The other thing is implanting can be really simple if a lot of things go right and if our needles are sharp. I'm going to talk about those things that we hope go right in a minute, and things that we need to do. One of those being adequately restraining the animal's head. Okay. But we want to replace or sharpen those needles as needed. They're consumables. They're really cheap. My recommendation is, as they dull, have extras on hand, but replace them as we need to. Okay. It's absolutely critical that we make sure the implant site, the ear is the only place where we could administer the implant. It's absolutely critical that we make sure that it is clean prior to implanting. Okay. If we implant, if through that implanting process we take in dirt, manure, something that's going to potentially cause some localized infection and an abscess, implant's not going to work. Animal's probably going to be fine, implant's not going to work. Okay. And so we want to make sure that we do everything that we can to avoid that. Again, we want to make sure the animal's head's adequately restrained. Implanting is really easy when the calf's not moving its head. It's aggravating when they are. And so that's where restraint becomes important. From a calf hood implant standpoint, what I would tell you is, here in the Texas Panhandle, the majority of those calves are implanted on the ground with somebody laying on top of them during a rope and drag branding. Okay. Those calves typically do not go through a chute or a calf table. They're on the ground. So it's absolutely possible. We don't necessarily have to have fancy facilities or equipment to be able to achieve it. Okay, that implant dose gets deposited beneath the skin of the ear. So think of it as a subcutaneous injection in a single file line. So we want to avoid bunching or crushing the implant pellets. We want to avoid pushing the needle all the way through the ear and depositing the pellets on the ground. We also want to avoid embedding the implant in the cartilage. If we do that, calf's going to be fine, not going to benefit from the implant. The other thing is, we want to make sure we're cognizant of expiration dates. We don't use expired implants, and we store them accordingly after the package has been opened. Okay, because there may be different storage instructions or directions for implants that have not been opened versus those that have. Okay, I said it a couple times, I'm going to say it again. We need to make sure the animal's head's properly restrained. We need the ear to be clean. If necessary, clean it. The majority of cattle that get implanted, their ear didn't get cleaned. It was clean enough and not a problem. If there's any noticeable dirt, manure, debris, we want to remove it. Okay, easiest way to do that, if it's caked on, use a blunt object, the backside of a plastic butter knife, a Scotch comb, something along those lines, to scrape the manure, then brush it off, and then take a rag soap in chemical disinfectant like chlorhexidine and wipe over that area. Then we're good to implant. Okay. I mentioned the needle being clean. It needs to be sharp. It needs to be securely attached. The implant applicator has to be loaded. Okay. Some applicators will automatically reload themselves. Some applicators will not. Be familiar with the tool, make sure it's functional, make sure there is a round in the chamber, and that the needle's clean and ready to go to work. Okay, got a couple of videos here just showing this process and how quick and simple it can be. Now, these aren't calf hood implants. These actually took at a research feed yard in Bushland. This would be a larger, so this is about a 9 pellet dose implant being administered to cattle on feed, but nonetheless, Process is the same. This is a Revelor implant gun. So if you use something like Revelor G, that's going to be an applicator that you would use for it. That's not an applicator that you would use for some of the other products. Okay. From a disinfectant standpoint, we just want to make sure we wipe the applicator off in disinfectant. What really works well, if you don't have a fancy disinfectant tray, which most people don't, but what really works well is a paint tray with a sponge sitting in it that has about a ½ an inch worth of chlorhexidine solution sitting in the bottom of it. You can flip that sponge over as you need to make it wet. Wipe the applicator needle across that to clean it between every animal or during an implant process if it becomes dirty and we need to clean it. All right. Administering the implant, I'm going to talk through this process. I've got some videos here that'll show again of the same thing. I'm going to start by grasping the ear with one hand. I'm going to hold the applicator parallel to the back side of the ear with our other hand. Okay, we're then going to pierce the skin with the needle and slightly lift that skin to avoid piercing the cartilage. We also want to try and make sure we avoid any major blood vessels. There's going to be some blood with implanting cattle. Okay, typically not an issue. The other thing that I want to point out is we want to put that implant in a single file line in the middle third of the ear between the two major ribs. Okay, and both these videos will show you exactly where that implant needs to go. Okay, we want to fully insert the needle. Depending upon the gun or the applicator, we might need to withdraw it 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, maybe even the length of the entire implant dose if it is an applicator that the needle does not automatically withdraw. Okay, we have to create space for the implant to reside. Okay, an example for that type of applicator would be a Ralgro gun. Okay, or if we're using an implant applicator that the needle does self-retract, we don't want to withdraw it, because what's going to happen if we do that is we're going to increase the risk of one or more of the pellets from that implant dose falling out. Okay, and so an example of a gun or applicator that the needle does retract would be a Synovex applicator, or at least the Synovex. I think it's the SX2, the plastic applicator gun. There's a specific name for it. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But nonetheless, just be familiar with the applicator and know whether or not we need to withdraw the needle a little bit. We're going to pull the trigger. That's going to deploy the implant into the ear. Okay. And then we're going to withdraw the needle if it does not self-retract. Okay. Then we're going to gently feel the top of that implant to ensure proper placement. That's also going to help to seal the hole in the skin that remains. Okay. Okay. So you can see the person checking to make sure that implant went where it was supposed to go. It's not bunched up. It's in a single file line. And as you notice, all the pellets stayed in the implant site. Okay. This line will be smaller for most calf hood implants. Okay. Common issues that might impact efficacy. Okay. So if we crush or bunch the implant dose during administration, that's going to change the dynamics of how it's emitted and therefore absorbed by the animal, and going to potentially change or negate the response. Okay. If we push the needle all the way through the ear, the dose goes on the ground, doesn't provide any benefit. Okay. If we deposit it into the cartilage rather than subcutaneously, and so this video on the top, this is an example of an implant going in the cartilage. Okay. That's not a good implant. We know that implant not going to hurt the animal. We're not going to get a response out of that. And over the lifetime of the animal, that can be a substantial amount of weight. It could be upwards of over 100 pounds of final weight in that animal that we could not get back otherwise. Okay, if the implant site or the needle were dirty, or the person's hand, if we've done something to potentially contaminate that, such as this video at the bottom. Okay, this person's hand was dirty. Okay, that's the value in wearing gloves when we do this, is when we need clean hands, All we got to do is take the gloves off and we can put a new pair on. We've got clean hands. Okay. And so I'd highly encourage you to wear gloves when you implant for that reason. Okay. For the cleanliness aspect. Okay. If the needle's dull, it's going to complicate putting the needle and thus the implant where we need it to go. And then ultimately, if we don't load the gun, we can't expect it to deploy a dose into the animal. Okay. That is commonly one of the major issues, is that somebody didn't actually recock or load the gun afterwards, and they didn't have put a dose in the animal. And one of the last things that I want to mention is implants and sustainability. We often hear marketing programs or production strategies that exclude the use of growth promoting technologies such as implants. We often hear them being touted as more sustainable options. And I would argue from a true sustainability standpoint, that is factually incorrect. Okay. Implants have and play an important role in sustainability of our industry. Okay. And they do that through a couple different ways. Okay. One of those ways is through that they increase production efficiency. Okay. They do that through improving average daily gain. And if we think about implants at the cow-calf level, that translates into increased weaning weight. Okay. So they increase production efficiency. They're economically viable. Okay. They yield a positive return on a relatively minimal investment. Okay. They're socially responsible. So they're FDA approved. Okay. And the vast majority of the scientific evidence supports their continued safety. Okay. We have no reason to believe that any of the implants that we currently use in beef cattle are of any concern to human or animal health or safety. And the last thing that I want to point out that it plays into this this sustainability discussion is that they're environmentally friendly. Okay. If we actually look at the impact of an implant on unit of our gaseous emissions per unit of beef production, implants are a valuable tool. Okay. And so I've just done some quick calculations. If we were to look at a 38 cow beef herd that implants half of their calf crop, so implants just the steer calves, okay, that's going to decrease carbon emissions by nearly 4,000 pounds of CO2 equivalents per year relative to the amount of beef that's produced. Okay. And so another way of stating that would be to produce the same amount of beef at the farm gate. So in weaned calf, okay, from that same operation, if we did not use implants, that's going to result in almost 4,000 additional pounds of CO2 equivalents, because it takes more cows or more calves to produce the same amount of weaned weight that's leaving that operation. Okay. Now we can argue all day. Does this even come close to comparing to other contributors to greenhouse gas emissions? No, it doesn't. And that's not what I'm here to argue. But if we look at this just for its own face value, 3,900 pounds of CO2 equivalent in methane being emitted into the atmosphere, that's a potential reduction that is attributed just to this implant. And I think that's something that we should tell that story, and we should hang our hats on among these other things. Just again, to summarize that, I think it's important that we recognize and embrace the fact that implants do play an important role in the sustainability of our industry. Okay. I'm not talking about the sustainability that we hear in popular press. I'm talking about true industry sustainability, the ability of us to continue doing what we do, and that's produce wholesome, high quality beef to feed the world. Okay. So just to summarize and wrap up here at the end, implants, they don't decrease what buyers are willing to pay for feeder cattle. They're they increase weaning weight and the overall value of cattle, yield a positive and substantial return on their investment. And at the end of the day, they result in a product that's safe and wholesome for the consumer. And in doing that, they enhance our industry sustainability through increasing production efficiency and decreasing carbon emissions. And I think those are some pretty important aspects that we should keep in the back of our minds. One that should play into our decision of whether or not to use implants. I'm not saying everyone should use implants on their operations, but what I am saying is that I think these are real things that we should all consider. But two, I think this is information that should hopefully help a lot of us to have a more informed discussion about the value that technologies such as implants play and the role that they play in our industry. With that, I certainly appreciate your all's time tonight. Absolutely enjoy every opportunity I have to work with y'all at Tennessee, and certainly enjoyed my time that I had the opportunity to spend there. We do have two last poll questions. So Mallory, if you want to go ahead and cue those up. I'll walk through those as they come up, but be thinking of, if you don't already have them, any questions that you might have on implants. I'm happy to stay on as long as I need to answer any of those, but certainly want to encourage questions if you do have them. Okay, so the last two polling questions that we have, the first one: has the information provided through tonight's webinar increased your understanding of growth promoting hormone implants? So in that specific question, not necessarily asking if it's influenced your decision to use them, but do you believe that you are now more or less informed about growth promoting hormone implants? Okay, and so that's a yes or no question. Have you learned something? The last question is, I'd like you to pick the option that best describes your likelihood or willingness to use or not use implants in the future. And those options are that yes, you are likely to use an implant in the future. No, you are not likely to use implants in the future. You're unsure and you still need more information before you decide. And if that's the case, I hope you either ask a question or send that information into the chat so we can use this as an opportunity to go ahead and answer those questions if I'm able to. And then lastly, the question doesn't apply to you because you don't raise cattle. So if you all go ahead and answer those polling questions for us, greatly appreciate it. And while we do that, I'm happy to go ahead and entertain any questions. I'm going to go ahead and read through the chat box and answer those first, and then as others come in, either send them into the chat or if people have the opportunity, you'll have to let me know, Mallory or Katie, if they do have the opportunity to unmute themselves and ask the question. Let's go ahead and try and get those asked. So the first one: we sell slaughter steers straight to the consumer. If Joe Public believes no implants are better, then no implants are better. So I believe that there is some truth to that. Okay, and so if consumers want a product and they're willing to pay a premium for that product, then I think we should absolutely provide them with that product. Okay, and so these are my opinions that I'm going to share in reference to this, and my opinions that are based upon the science that exists. But there are lots of things that Joe Public believe that are incorrect, and that belief becomes incredibly problematic. And so this doesn't just apply to cattle; it applies to everything in society, right? And so where I think we play a role in that comment and in that issue is we do have the opportunity to educate the public. Are some of them never going to listen? Absolutely. Okay. Some of them don't want to hear it. They're never going to hear what the science actually has to say behind this. Okay. But one of the things that I want to make sure that none of us do is I want to highly, highly discourage anyone from marketing cattle under a premise that is false, that is to the disadvantage of someone else. And so the exact example that I'll use here is marketing non-implanted, natural, however you want to describe them, cattle under the premise that they are safer, they're going to be healthier for the consumer, or that it's better for any reason, because the data, the science, the evidence does not support that. Okay. And so that's one of the things that I would encourage people. But yeah, if somebody wants a product, we absolutely should provide that product to them. Now, one of the things that I hope that I've been able to convey, and we did not focus on finishing implants, but the magnitude of response that cattle experience to an implant during the finishing phase is far more than the magnitude of response that they experience during the suckling calf phase. Okay, so we are potentially leaving dollars on the table if we are not capturing additional value through those cattle not being implanted. Okay, and so they have to be willing to pay more to pay for those pounds that are left on the table. If that's the case, more often than not, if we're talking about locally produced, relatively small scale finished cattle, that's often going to be the case, because people are often paying a substantial premium for that. To put that into perspective, right now in the Texas Panhandle, fed cattle are worth approximately $1,700 to $1,800 per head. That's to the cattle feeder. Okay, they may be worth more than that. They may be worth less than that, depending upon the quality of cattle and how they're marketed. But conventional cattle, that's what a 1,350 pound finished steer is worth right now. Okay, so we absolutely have to be returning, and we have to be bringing in income far above and beyond that to justify that. So if we're not implanting, and let's just say we're giving up 100 pounds of that, that's at least 140 additional dollars that we have to be able to bring in otherwise. I saw there was another comment: cannot disagree, sell them what they want to buy. Absolutely. I don't disagree with that. Just want to reiterate that what we don't want to do from an industry standpoint is sell a misperception, and over time selling that misperception result in loss of some of the technologies that contribute to sustainability of our industry. We could argue that's already happened to the dairy industry with removal of the use of BST because of consumer misperception. All right, any questions that have not yet come in? All right, Mallory, where are we at in terms of the last poll question responses?
I've got 22 out of 23
Okay.
that participated, so I've got one more.
All right, we'll give them another minute or so, and then, like I said, if you do have questions, don't hesitate to send them in now. Reach out to me. Happy to help in any way that I can, and absolutely appreciate your all's time and attention this evening, even with me running a little bit over on time. Did get a question that came in: would you recommend implants for a small operation, 10 to 15 calves? Is it worthwhile? Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend implants for an operation regardless of their size, and the reason I say that is the response to the implant doesn't care if it goes in one calf or it goes into 10,000 calves. The response is going to be the same, with the exception to, yes, individual animals are going to respond differently. But the point being is that average 5% improvement in weaning weight is going to happen across calves. Okay. And so I believe that it's absolutely worthwhile. What I encourage people to do, though, is to pair implanting with another production management practice. Okay, so do what we can to try to make that as convenient as possible. And so a prime example I'll use is if we're vaccinating calves somewhere towards the beginning of the breeding season for the cow herd. That's a great time to go ahead and put an implant in that calf, because once you've done a handful of implants and become relatively proficient at it, we're talking less than a minute or two to implant that calf. We look at a feed yard and a processing crew that implants, we're talking about seconds to implant an animal. And so absolutely, I think it's worthwhile regardless of the size. I am a proponent of everybody evaluating and making sure that, as my brother likes to put it, the juice is worth the squeeze for their operation. I believe it is. I think everybody needs to put pencil to paper and determine whether that improvement is worthwhile or not. What I will say, though, is that, in my role in extension and over the past almost 7 years, it is a rare day that I'm not asked or don't come across a situation where somebody wants the silver bullet. They want something that is going to increase value of cattle, and it's going to be cheap, it's going to be economical, and it's going to be easy. Those things are pretty few and far between. Implants are one of those things. And so I'd certainly encourage anyone, regardless of size, to adopt use of the technology. Okay. Another question came in is, do certain types of implants work better on certain breeds, and does it matter? Okay. So from a science-based standpoint, I'm not certain that data or those experiments necessarily exist. What I will say from a practical standpoint, and some of my personal observations have been that, yes, there are certain implants, or probably more appropriately stated as there are certain implant strategies that are more appropriately tailored to certain types of cattle. May not necessarily be breeds of cattle, but certain types of cattle, certain production focuses, certain goals, certain marketing and productivity objectives, and those types of things. So an example that I'll use is, if we're someone that is really, really focused on marbling, I'm still going to recommend that we implant cattle during each stage of production, but we may not use the most aggressive implant strategy during the backgrounding or the finishing program because of the impact that might have on marbling development. I'm just using that as an example. Another area would be if we're someone that's marketing cattle, marketing beef directly to a consumer with a focus on tenderness. Okay. There's certain implant strategies that can have a small but measurable impact on tenderness. Okay. And so those are things that we certainly need to be aware of. They're not things that we need to be terrified of, but we need to be aware of and that we can manage around. From more of a breed and a cattle type standpoint, I would say for those of us that are finishing what I'll call grass cattle, so whether we're grass finishing them or we're finishing them primarily on grass, but we're supplementing some on the side, if we struggle to get cattle finished before we harvest those cattle, the implants maybe not the best option for us, because we are going to increase the size at which that cattle or those cattle reach the same mature endpoint. Okay. And so if we already struggle with getting cattle finished into an acceptable end weight prior to harvesting them, which is not an uncommon issue particularly for grass-based forage finished cattle, That situation where we maybe, I don't want to say that we don't want to implant those cattle, but we want to make sure that we're not using an overly aggressive or potent implant in that situation. To go into more detail than that, I or anyone else would probably need to know a little more about the specific type of cattle, the specific production scenario. But if that's something that you do or anyone has specific questions on, don't hesitate to let me know, and I can at least tell you what my recommendation would be for that scenario. There was a comment that I think's really well stated, probably far better than I stated it. Absolutely much more concise and to the point. But that I do want to make sure that everyone hears, in case they don't read the chat or don't have access to it, is that the misperception that implants or other growth promoting technologies are really, they've gotten us to where we are now with the public. It's also critically important that we're honest with our customer base. And I think those two things were very, very well said, and wanted to make sure that everybody heard those. We need to be honest. If they've got a product that they want us to produce, let's produce it for them. Let's make sure they're going to pay us for it. But absolutely, very, very good points that were very well made. All right. So I did not see the responses to those other polls come up. They may have come up and I just missed them. Did they already come up and go away, Mallory?
No, you're good. I'm able to share them. I was going to ask if you would like to see those or not.
Yeah, let's see them.
Okay.
Awesome. So over 90% of you learned something tonight, and it looks like there's at least been some increase in or change in willingness to use implants in the future. I would, while we're still on, it looks like there's 5 out of 23 or almost 25% of you said that you're unsure and you still need more information before you decide whether or not you want to use implants on your operation. So if you wouldn't mind, if you're still on, go ahead and type those into the chat. If it's information I can provide now, I'd like to go ahead and provide it. If not, it's still going to be valuable information to us, because then we can use that to tailor our educational programs and the information that we provide moving forward. So if you would not mind, let me know, those of you that are still on that are unsure, let me know what information you need that we haven't yet provided. And while we're waiting, we'll just take a minute or two to wait for those to come in. If there's any other questions, please send them in through the chat, and I'll be certain to try and answer those to the best of my ability. All right, I'm looking really quick. I don't know if you can see it, Mallory or Katie, on your end, if anyone is typing or not. I don't see anything on my end. Maybe wait just another quick moment, and then if we don't have any comments come in, certainly wouldn't mind if any of you are willing to reach out to me with those comments as to what other additional information you need. Just want to make sure we do everything we can to provide that information to you.
Yeah, that's right. I don't see anything here, Jason, but feel free to take down his email, his phone number. Of course, reach out to your county agent or any of the specialists at UT as well, and we'd be happy to get those questions answered, or to Jason for him to answer as well. So I don't see anything coming in, but thank you so much for being with us tonight, Jason. This has been really good information, and hopefully if folks have questions, they'll reach out. And I think this has been really informative. So we appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you, Katie. I really appreciate the opportunity and certainly enjoyed it. Yeah, as Katie said, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to help in any way that I can. I also want to thank you all for taking the time out of your night to spend with us. Certainly, like I said, it's been enjoyable. So hope everybody has a good rest of the evening. And I'll hand it back over to you, Katie and Mallory. I don't know if y'all have any housekeeping items or anything that you need to discuss, but nonetheless, I think that's it for me.
That's all for us as well. Thank y'all for joining us, and we'll see you next month.
Have a good night, everyone.